The morning sunlight broke through the trees, spilling warm light over the quiet forest. A young explorer named Ethan walked slowly through the tall grass, his small backpack bouncing against his shoulder. He loved places like this, calm, untouched, and full of secrets waiting to be discovered. For him, every trail told a story, and every rusted sign or broken path had something worth finding. He wasn't a famous explorer or anything close to that. He was just a man with a camera and a love for nature. On weekends, while most people stayed home scrolling through their phones, Ethan preferred to disappear into the woods. He filmed what he found: old cabins, forgotten roads, and sometimes strange abandoned houses. He uploaded these little adventures to his YouTube channel. It wasn't huge, but a few thousand people followed his videos and enjoyed watching him uncover the quiet mysteries of the world. That morning, he had driven farther than usual. A local fisherman had told him about an old forest on the edge of a coastal town, dense, overgrown, and rarely visited. Some said the place had been blocked off decades ago because of land instability, but others claimed it was just forgotten. The story intrigued him. He packed his camera, water, drone, and some snacks, then set off early to explore it. The trail was rough and uneven. The deeper he went, the quieter everything became. There were no birds singing, no wind rustling the branches, just silence. Even his footsteps sounded too loud. The air was cool and slightly damp, carrying a faint metallic smell that didn't fit the usual scent of forest soil. He walked for hours, following an old dirt track that seemed to vanish and reappear between the trees. Then suddenly he noticed something odd. A patch of sunlight reflected off something ahead, a flash of dull silver through the green leaves. At first he thought it was just a large piece of metal debris or an old truck. But as he got closer, the shape grew bigger and clearer. When he finally pushed through the bushes, he froze. In front of him stood what looked like the curved side of a massive ship, its surface rusted and covered with moss and vines. The structure rose far above the tree line, its white paint now stained brown and green with age. It was impossible, completely out of place. A ship this big couldn't be here. There was no river nearby, no ocean for miles. He stood in silence for a long moment, staring in disbelief. Then he laughed quietly to himself, the sound nervous and amazed at once. "No way," he whispered. He walked closer, brushing vines aside to reveal more of the strange object. There were small round windows, portholes lined along the side, just like those on a cruise ship. The forest had wrapped around it over the years, swallowing it in branches and moss. From the ground up, it seemed endless. Ethan lifted his camera and began recording, speaking softly into the mic. His voice trembled with excitement. "I don't even know how to describe this," he said. There's a ship in the middle of the forest. A full-size ship." He circled around to find a way in. Every few steps he stopped to take photos and short clips. Up close he could read faint letters under the rust. Only part of the name was visible. Riddy Star. He guessed the full name once said Serenity Star. It sounded like a cruise liner or something built for long voyages. The size of it was overwhelming. He ran his hand over the cold metal surface, still solid after what must have been decades. Parts of the outer railing were broken, but others remained intact, showing traces of old blue paint beneath the dirt. "How did this even get here?" he muttered. He checked his GPS. It showed his location as several miles inland. No waterways were anywhere close. There wasn't even a large lake nearby that could have explained this. The ship's position made no sense. Ethan found an opening at the base of the hull where the metal had rusted through. He leaned in but decided not to go inside yet. The light was fading and exploring the interior in the dark would be risky. Instead, he launched his drone to capture aerial shots. As the drone rose above the trees, his small monitor displayed the full image. The ship stretched across a clearing, long and silent, its bow slightly tilted to one side. Trees had grown around it, wrapping the vessel in green. From the air, it looked almost like a forgotten monument rather than a wreck. He stood watching the drone footage, still in disbelief. The idea of finding a cruise ship in a forest was beyond anything he had ever imagined. He couldn't wait to share this discovery. Before leaving, he marked the exact coordinates in his GPS device and made sure his camera batteries were full. He wanted to return the next day with proper gear, lights, masks, and someone to accompany him if possible. The thought of stepping inside that enormous structure both thrilled and unnerved him. As he packed up, he noticed how quiet the forest had become again. Even the wind had died down, leaving a strange stillness in the air. He took one last look at the massive ship and whispered, "Tomorrow." That night, back at his small apartment, Ethan loaded the footage onto his computer. The video clips were crisp and clear. The hull, the overgrown vines, the portholes, everything looked surreal. He posted a short teaser on his channel with the caption, "You won't believe what I found in the woods." Within hours, the clip spread fast. Comments flooded in. Some people thought it was fake or a movie set. Others said it might be a ship that had been carried inland by a flood decades ago. A few users mentioned urban legends about missing military vessels hidden in forests. The response only made him more determined. He spent the next day researching ships named Serenity Star, but found almost nothing. No records, no photos, no registration under that name. It was as if the ship had never existed. As the night went on, he replayed his drone footage several times, studying every frame. On the far end of the deck, barely visible through the moss, he spotted something strange. What looked like an emblem or insignia painted near the upper structure. It was too blurry to identify, but it didn't look like a regular cruise line logo. It seemed official, like a government seal. The thought sent a chill through him. Maybe this wasn't a tourist ship after all. He turned off the lights and sat quietly for a moment. The hum of his computer fan was the only sound in the room. For the first time, he wondered if he should be careful about what he shared online. But curiosity had always been stronger than fear for him. He decided he would go back at sunrise, this time prepared to explore inside. The next morning came quickly. He barely slept. With his backpack packed and batteries charged, he drove back to the forest. The sun was still low, casting golden light over the misty fields. As he parked his car near the old dirt path, he noticed that the air felt heavier than yesterday, almost humid and thick. He walked the familiar trail, this time more confident. The forest seemed even quieter, though. Every now and then he looked back, half expecting to see someone following him, but there was no one. When he reached the clearing, the ship stood exactly where it had been, silent and unmoving. Yet something about it felt different. The air around it was colder, and a faint metallic echo drifted through the trees like the sound of metal shifting deep within. Ethan raised his camera again and began recording. "Day 2, he whispered. "I'm back to check inside the mysterious ship in the forest. Still no clue how it got here." He moved slowly toward the rusted hole near the base. The edges were sharp, so he used gloves to pull himself up. The inside was dark and smelled of dampness and old wood. His flashlight beam revealed dust swirling in the air, catching the light like tiny stars. He didn't go far, just enough to see the first corridor. It was lined with doors on both sides, and at the far end a staircase led upward. Everything was covered in decay, but he could still make out pieces of wallpaper, faded carpet, and signs of furniture once used by passengers. He recorded a short video and then backed out. It was enough for today. He didn't want to rush it. Tomorrow he would explore properly, with lights, masks, and maybe a friend to keep watch outside. As he walked away, he glanced back once more. The ship loomed tall and silent behind him, half-eaten by nature yet still strangely majestic. It felt like a sleeping giant that didn't want to be disturbed. When he reached his car, the wind picked up for the first time that day, brushing through the trees like a whisper. Ethan didn't notice it at first, but if he had stayed a little longer, he might have heard it clearly. The faint metallic groan echoing from deep inside the forest, as if the ship itself was breathing again after years of silence. He started his car, unaware that this discovery was only the beginning, and that what waited inside that forgotten vessel would change everything he thought he knew about hidden places and the secrets they keep. Ethan woke up before sunrise. His mind had barely rested. All night he kept seeing that massive ship in his head, standing tall among trees, silent and waiting. It felt like the forest had swallowed a secret too big to hide, and now that he had found it, he couldn't walk away. He packed carefully this time. Flashlight, mask, gloves, camera, batteries, water, a small crowbar, and a rope. He even brought a small portable light in case the inside was too dark. Before leaving, he checked the teaser video he had posted last night. It already had over 200,000 views. Comments were pouring in. People calling it fake, others trying to guess the location, some begging him not to go back alone. He smiled nervously. "I'll be careful," he muttered to himself, though deep down he wasn't sure if he believed it. The drive back to the forest was quiet. The sun rose slowly behind thin clouds and the road stretched endlessly with no other cars in sight. When he reached the dirt trail, he parked in the same spot as yesterday. Everything looked the same, yet the forest felt heavier, like it was watching him. He walked fast through the familiar path until the trees opened into the clearing. And there it was again, the cruise ship, standing impossibly still, its metal sides gleaming faintly under the morning light. Vines hung from the railings like ropes, and the hull was streaked with rust that looked almost red. He took a deep breath and turned on his camera. "Day 2, he said softly, his voice a mix of excitement and nerves. "I'm going inside today." The opening at the base of the ship was wide enough for him to climb through. He pulled himself up carefully, flashlight in hand. The air inside was colder and smelled of old salt mixed with damp earth. Every sound he made echoed through the empty hallways. He stepped into what must have been a corridor once. The walls were covered with flaking wallpaper and the floor creaked beneath his boots. A few broken chairs lay scattered, their cushions torn open by time and mold. He whispered to his camera. It's hard to believe this was once full of people. His flashlight beam moved across faded numbers painted on each cabin door. 212, 214, 216. The handles were rusted shut. He pushed one open with effort and the door groaned loudly. Inside he found 2 beds side by side with old sheets still half tucked. A small mirror on the wall reflected the thin light from his flashlight. Dust floated in the air, glittering in silence. On a small table sat a glass, half filled with something dark long ago dried. There was even an old magazine lying open to a page showing a tropical island. Everything looked frozen, as if the people who stayed here had left in a hurry and never returned. He whispered again. It's like time stopped. He continued down the corridor until he reached a wider hall. The walls opened into what appeared to be the main lounge. Even though it was falling apart, Ethan could still imagine how beautiful it must have been. Chandeliers, long tables, elegant chairs. He ran his hand along the edge of a broken counter, where the faint smell of old wood and rust mixed with the damp air. On the far wall, he saw something that caught his attention, a nameplate half covered in grime. He wiped it with his glove until the letters became clear. The Serenity Star Cruise, 1978. He froze. So the ship really was called Serenity Star. The date was decades old, but he had checked every database he could find last night. There was no record of any ship by that name. He stepped back, his flashlight trembling slightly. Why would a ship like this be here? And how did it even get this far inland? He decided to explore further. At the end of the hall, a staircase led upward. He climbed carefully, avoiding broken steps. The air felt thicker as he reached the next floor. Here, large windows lined the walls, though most were cracked or fogged with grime. Outside, he could see nothing but green, trees stretching endlessly around the ship. He filmed quietly as he moved, capturing every corner. His flashlight caught the remains of a dining area, silverware still scattered across tables. A single shoe lay in the middle of the floor, covered in dust. He crouched beside it, staring for a long time. Whoever had been here must have left in a hurry, leaving everything behind. It was eerie but fascinating. Then in one of the side rooms he found something different, a small office with shelves full of books and folders. Most were falling apart, but one old logbook lay open on the desk. The pages were yellowed, and the ink had faded, but some words were still readable. He turned on his camera again and read aloud. Log entry, June 3rd, 1978, weather stable. Anchored inland for testing. Crew restricted to quarters until further notice. He frowned. Anchored inland? He repeated, confused. How could a cruise ship anchor inland? He flipped a few more pages. Most were blank, but one line on the last page stood out, circled in red ink. Coordinates changed. Operation complete. Ethan felt a chill run through him. This wasn't some tourist vessel lost to time. Something else had happened here. Something planned. He folded the logbook carefully and placed it in his bag. Then he turned to leave, but a sudden noise stopped him cold. A faint metallic creak echoed from somewhere deeper inside the ship. It wasn't wind, it sounded deliberate, like footsteps on metal. He held his breath and listened. Nothing, just silence again. Maybe it was the old structure shifting, he told himself. But his heart was beating faster now. He continued exploring, trying to shake the uneasy feeling. As he reached the upper deck, he saw the control room through a shattered door. He stepped inside, shining his light across the instruments. The panels were covered in dust, but the labels were still visible. Navigation, radar, engine control. He pointed his camera toward one corner where an old folder sat open. Inside were pages filled with typed text and diagrams he couldn't fully understand. But one symbol kept appearing at the top, a circle with 3 lines inside surrounded by a triangle. It didn't look like any cruise company logo. It looked official. He whispered quietly. This ship wasn't just for travel. He leaned closer to the console. The main steering wheel was still there, stiff with rust. On a clipboard nearby, a final page was still clipped under a metal pin. The words on it were faint but readable. Project Serenity, Department of Marine Defense Research. He stepped back slowly, the realization settling in. The Serenity Star wasn't just a cruise liner. It had been used for something else, a government project. But what kind of project needed a full-size ship hidden in a forest? Before he could think further, his flashlight flickered. He tapped it a few times and it came back on, weaker now. The shadows around him seemed to stretch as the light dimmed. He decided it was time to leave. He made his way back down, moving faster this time. Each step echoed louder in the hollow silence. When he reached the exit hole, he stopped one last time and looked back. His light beam swept across the corridor, the empty rooms, the quiet decay. For a brief moment, he thought he saw movement at the far end, a door slowly swinging shut on its own. He didn't wait to see more. He climbed out and dropped to the forest floor, breathing hard. The fresh air outside felt unreal, like he had just stepped out of another world. He turned off his camera and stood there, staring at the ship as sunlight hit its rusted surface. Back at home, he uploaded the footage. As the videos processed, he zoomed in on the frames showing the logbook and the documents with the strange logo. The text was clear enough to read, and the emblem was unlike anything he had seen before. He searched online again. Department of Marine Defense Research. Nothing. Not a single record. No company, no government branch, nothing. It was as if it didn't exist. He sat in silence for a while, staring at the frozen frame on his screen. The symbol inside the triangle. Something about it felt wrong, like he had stepped into a story that wasn't meant to be found. As he scrolled through the comments on his latest post, he noticed a few strange ones. One user simply wrote, "Don't go back." Another said, "That ship was sealed for a reason." Ethan leaned back in his chair, the glow of the monitor lighting his tired face. He thought about stopping, but then he looked at the logbook sitting on his desk, its old paper glowing softly under the lamp. No, he couldn't stop now, not when he was this close to the truth. Whatever this operation had been, someone had gone to great lengths to hide it. He turned off the lights and looked out the window. The night outside was still and dark. In the distance, he could almost imagine the shadow of the forest and within it, the silent shape of that forgotten ship, waiting for him to return. Tomorrow, he decided, he would go back again. Not just to film, but to find out what really happened inside the Serenity Star. Ethan didn't sleep much that night. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the dark hallways of the ship, the logbook, and those strange words. Anchored inland. Operation complete. They played over and over in his head like a broken record. He couldn't let it go. He had to know what really happened. By morning, he sat at his desk with coffee gone cold beside him. His computer screen was filled with open tabs, old ship registries, and scanned documents from maritime archives. Still nothing came up under Serenity Star. It was like the ship had been erased from history. He sighed and leaned back, staring at the faded logbook on the desk. The more he looked at it, the more he noticed. Tiny details like the paper's texture and faint stamps at the top of the pages. One stamp had numbers that looked like a military code. That gave him an idea. Maybe the ship wasn't listed under a regular cruise name at all. Maybe it had been part of a classified project. He spent hours searching online forums where retired sailors and researchers talked about old maritime mysteries. Finally, one post caught his eye. It mentioned rumors of a government project in the late 1970s called Project Serenity. The message was short and vague, but it said something about a vessel used for advanced energy testing that vanished during a trial. Ethan's heart started beating faster. The post was from an account that hadn't been active for years. He tried to contact the person but got no reply. Still, it was enough to push him further. By evening, he decided to visit the local town near the forest. It was small, the kind of place where everyone knew everyone. He figured someone there might have heard stories about the ship or seen something strange years ago. When he arrived, he stopped by a small diner. The place smelled of coffee and old wood. He sat at the counter, ordered a sandwich, and started chatting with the old man behind it. The man's name tag read Paul. Ethan asked casually, "Hey, do you know if there's ever been a big ship near the forest outside town?" Paul looked up slowly. "A ship?" he repeated, raising an eyebrow. "Yeah," Ethan said, trying to sound relaxed. "I was hiking there a few days ago and found something that looks like one. It's old, rusted, covered in vines." Paul stayed quiet for a moment, then wiped his hands on a towel. "You shouldn't go there," he said finally. Ethan frowned. "Why not?" The man looked around, lowering his voice. "That forest's been off limits since the early '80s. There were government people up there back then. Helicopters, trucks, soldiers. Folks said they were doing soil research or something, but no one ever believed that. Then one day they packed up and left. The area's been quiet ever since." Ethan leaned forward. "Do you remember what year exactly?" "Not sure," Paul said. "Maybe 79 or 80. My father used to work for the county. He told me they fenced off part of the forest and said it was unstable ground. But he always thought something was buried there." That last line hit Ethan hard. Buried there. He thanked the man and left. As he drove back, the sky turned gray and the wind picked up, rattling the trees along the road. The more he thought about what Paul said, the clearer it became. Whatever had happened in that forest wasn't just an accident. When he got home, he pulled out the logbook again. This time he noticed faint marks on the back cover, like it had once been stamped with a seal. He tilted it under the light and could just make out the faded words, "Property of the Department of Marine Defense Research." His stomach tightened. That same phrase had been written on the clipboard he found in the ship's control room. That night, he uploaded a new video, not the whole story, just short clips of the ship's hallways, the old cabins, and the nameplate. He didn't mention the documents or what he suspected about government involvement. He wanted to be sure first. The video exploded overnight. People were fascinated. Some said it was the discovery of the decade. Others accused him of creating a fake set. But one comment stood out from the rest. It came from an account named Old Tide Engineer. The comment read, "You found her. I worked on that ship. Don't go back there." Ethan's hands froze on the keyboard. He replied immediately, asking for more information. Minutes later, he received a private message. The sender claimed to be a retired Marine engineer who had been part of Project Serenity in 1978. Their first few messages were cautious. The man said he could only talk briefly and not over text. He gave Ethan a phone number and told him to call from a payphone, not his own. That alone made Ethan nervous, but his curiosity won out. The next morning, he found an old payphone outside a gas station and dialed the number. The line clicked after 2 rings. A tired voice said, "You really found it?" "Yes," Ethan said quietly. "It's in the forest near the coast. How could a cruise ship end up there?" "It's not a cruise ship," the man said. "It never was." Ethan's grip on the phone tightened. "Then what was it?" There was a long pause before the man spoke again. "The Serenity was built as part of an experiment. The plan was to create a floating power system that could generate clean energy from ocean currents. But during one of the test runs, something went wrong. The reactor on board became unstable." "A reactor?" Ethan repeated, stunned. "Yes, a prototype that shouldn't have been tested. The leak started at sea. They couldn't risk it reaching the mainland, so they moved the ship, anchored it inland to contain the radiation and shut it down quietly." Ethan's heart raced. "Moved it inland? How is that even possible?" "Military operation," the man said. "They dismantled part of the hull, used massive cranes, and rebuilt sections once it was on dry ground. No one outside the project ever knew. When it was done, they buried the reports and sealed the area. Everyone involved was sworn to silence." The man paused again, his voice lower now. "You weren't supposed to find it." Ethan looked around, his pulse pounding. "Why keep it a secret after all these years?" "Because what's inside that ship never fully shut down," the man said quietly. "The reactor's still there, deep in the lower decks. It's dormant, but not dead." The phone clicked, and the line went dead. Ethan tried calling back, but the number was disconnected. He stood there for a while, trying to process what he'd just heard. If it was true, then that ship wasn't just abandoned. It was dangerous. Back home, he checked the footage again. When he had been in the engine room, he hadn't noticed anything that looked like a reactor, but he hadn't gone far enough either. Most of the doors were sealed. Maybe that was why he didn't post the new information online. Something told him to wait. Instead, he spent the rest of the day researching military operations from that period. There were scattered mentions of environmental containment projects, but none listed the Serenity by name. It was as if every trace of it had been scrubbed away. That night, strange things started happening. His computer froze multiple times. When he restarted it, some of his video files were missing. He tried to restore them, but the system gave an error message. He checked his external drive, it was fine, but a few folders were completely empty. Then he noticed something else. His front window curtain was slightly open, though he was sure he'd closed it. And across the street, parked under a broken streetlight, was a black SUV that hadn't been there before. He watched it for a few minutes. It didn't move, but he could see faint light reflecting off the windshield, as if someone was sitting inside. Ethan closed the curtain slowly. His heartbeat was loud in his ears. He knew he had to be smart now. He copied his remaining footage onto a hidden backup drive and kept it in a different location. If someone was trying to erase his findings, they wouldn't get everything. Later that night, as he lay in bed staring at the ceiling, he thought about what the engineer had said. The reactor's still there, was it true? Could that be why the government fenced off the forest and disappeared afterward? Maybe they were afraid someone would stumble onto something unstable, something they couldn't fully control. But if it was still active, why hadn't there been reports of radiation or danger? Unless the area had been designed to contain it. That thought sent a chill through him. He decided he would return to the ship again, but not immediately. He needed better equipment and maybe a Geiger counter to measure radiation levels. This time he'd go prepared. Outside, the wind brushed softly against the trees. The world seemed calm, but inside his chest his thoughts were racing. The ship wasn't just an abandoned mystery anymore. It was part of something far bigger, something buried for decades. As he finally drifted to sleep, one last thought stayed with him. If they had gone to such lengths to hide the Serenity Star, what else had they hidden with it? That night the explorer couldn't sleep. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw flashes of that rusted corridor and heard the hollow clang of metal footsteps echoing in his mind. The ship had felt alive, as if it was breathing with the forest. But what he heard before leaving, the footsteps, didn't sound like echoes. They sounded real. He told himself maybe it was his imagination, maybe a wild animal exploring, but deep inside, he knew it wasn't. Someone else had been there. By early morning, he packed his camera, a flashlight, and his drone again. He didn't tell anyone where he was going. The less people knew, the safer it felt. The forest was still misty when he arrived. Dew hung heavy on every branch, and the silence made even the crunch of his boots sound too loud. As he neared the place where the ship stood, he noticed fresh tire marks on the muddy path, something that hadn't been there before. His heart sank. When he reached the clearing, he froze. The air felt thicker. The ship looked the same, but something was off. There were fresh footprints near the hull, boot prints large and heavy. He slowly moved closer, gripping his camera tightly, recording everything. The silence of the forest was broken by a low metallic creak as the morning breeze brushed past the broken decks. It was the same eerie song he had heard before. He climbed the rusted ladder carefully, his hands trembling slightly. Once inside, he moved down the corridor, whispering softly to his camera. "If anyone finds this later, this is where I saw movement yesterday. I'm going to check the lower deck." As he made his way through the long hallway, he noticed that some of the dust on the floor looked disturbed, as if people had recently walked there. The trail led toward a steel door that had been jammed shut before, but now it was half open. He pushed it slightly, and it creaked loud enough to make his heart race. Inside was the ship's control room. Broken monitors covered in spiderwebs lined the walls. Papers were scattered across the floor. But what caught his eye was a faint light blinking in the corner, a small power indicator on one of the consoles. He stared at it, confused. The ship had no power source left, at least not one he'd seen. He knelt beside the console and found something strange. A small black box, newer than everything else, was connected to the wires. It wasn't old, it looked modern, clean, and deliberate. Someone had been here recently. Just as he leaned closer to inspect it, he heard footsteps again. Slow, heavy, close. He quickly turned off his flashlight and crouched behind the broken captain's chair, holding his breath. Through a crack in the wall, he could see faint beams of light moving through the corridor. Flashlights. 2 men entered the room, both wearing dark protective suits and helmets. Their voices were low, muffled, but he caught fragments. "Clear the lower deck first. No leaks this time." Size orders from above. They don't want anything left behind. His hands began to sweat. He knew he shouldn't be there. He stayed still, not even daring to breathe loudly. The men walked past his hiding spot, scanning the equipment with handheld devices. One of them pointed to the blinking box. "Leave it running. They'll collect the data tonight," the man said. Then they turned and left the room. He waited until their footsteps faded before daring to move. His pulse pounded in his ears. He picked up his camera and whispered shakily, "There are people here. They're not explorers. They're not police. I think they're here to destroy evidence." He slipped out of the control room and down the corridor, moving silently. He peeked out one of the windows and saw the men near the ship's base, talking next to a black vehicle parked under the trees. They looked official, organized, not random trespassers. When he finally reached the ladder, he climbed down as quietly as he could. The moment his feet touched the forest floor, he bolted. Branches whipped against his jacket as he ran through the thick forest. He didn't stop until he was far enough away to lose sight of the ship. Back at his car, he sat behind the wheel, shaking. He replayed the video footage on his camera screen. The faces of the men were hidden, but their voices and the suits they wore were clear. It was real evidence. He drove straight home, locking the door behind him. That night, he tried uploading the video online, but halfway through the process, his laptop froze. The screen went black for a few seconds, then restarted. When he checked the files again, half of them were gone. The folder where he had saved the latest footage was empty. He plugged the memory card back into the camera. Same thing. Everything he filmed inside the ship after finding the men had been erased. Only a few clips of the corridor and his shaky breathing were left. He felt sick. Someone had tampered with his files remotely, or worse, had been tracking his devices. Just then, he heard a car passing slowly outside his house. He peeked through the curtains and saw a black SUV parked across the street. No lights, no movement. It just sat there. The next morning it was gone, but he couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Later that day, he received an anonymous email. The subject line read, "We need to talk about the Serenity Star." Inside was a phone number and one sentence. "You're not the first person to find it." He hesitated for hours before calling. Finally, curiosity won. A tired male voice answered, speaking quietly. The man said he was a retired naval engineer who once worked on a classified maritime project. He confirmed that Serenity Star wasn't a normal cruise ship. It was part of a government experiment during the late 1970s. According to him, the ship was designed as a floating test site for a new energy system, something meant to revolutionize power generation at sea. But during a trial run, there was a leak, a failure, and a massive contamination risk. The project was shut down immediately, and everything about it was buried. The explorer asked, "Then how did it end up in the forest?" The man sighed. They couldn't sink it, not with what was inside. So they moved it, piece by piece. They built a false shoreline and dragged it inland to isolate it. Then they covered it up, literally, with trees and dirt over the years. It was never meant to be found again. Before he could ask more, the line went silent. The call dropped. When he tried calling back, the number no longer existed. That night, the explorer checked the street again. The SUV was back. This time, 2 men sat inside, their silhouettes faint under the streetlight. He turned off his lights and sat in the dark, waiting, his heart hammering. He realized he couldn't stop now. Whatever was happening, whatever the ship had been hiding, was something powerful enough to make people watch him, erase his files, and silence anyone who knew the truth. He copied the remaining footage onto several USB drives and hid them in different places. His garage, his friend's house, even one in the trunk of his car. Then he decided to go back to the forest one last time, but not right away. He needed to plan it carefully. He needed proof that no one could erase. He stared at his computer screen, reading the old notes from the ship's logbook again. Anchored inland. Operation complete. The words suddenly made sense. It wasn't a mistake. The ship had been anchored there on purpose. Outside, thunder rolled through the sky as rain started falling. The sound made him think of the forest again, the smell of wet soil, the quiet rustle of leaves, and that massive steel hull sleeping among the trees. Somewhere in there, hidden beneath layers of rust and secrets, was the truth. He whispered to himself, "They hid it for a reason, but I found it." And with that, he knew he couldn't walk away, not now.